Your end of day market recap for Tuesday, September 9th. I have a chart up to start the day and with Oracle. Huge numbers for Oracle. I'll just go over a couple highlights with you really quickly. Oracle sees cloud infrastructure revenue up 77% to $18 billion in full year 2026. This was from CEO Ellison. Comes out and says, we expect multi-cloud revenue to grow substantially every quarter for several years as we deliver another 37 data centers to our 3 hyperscaler partners for a total of 71. Huge numbers. And, again, this is one of those things that when you hear things like this, it kind of just shows you that, or tells you that, that the AI theme is going to be around for a bit. You may see profit taking from time to time, which I think that we've seen that, several times over the last couple months. That's what's kind of been very, very interesting about this market, and what I think has been, just a great market to trade. As from time to time, we'll see that profit taking come in, and then kind of like a reload, right? And so I think there's continues to be a lot of trading opportunities. The dips so far and like that AI theme as well as high growth, just been a lot of shallow dips, and that gives just great trading opportunities, right? To kind of get long things, sell, trim, and then be able to kind of add back once there's some profit taking in those. And I looked around today, and I'm going to bring up the performance for the day and all different groups, and we'll go through that a little bit. Um, but I think on a day-to-day basis, what's very cool about this market is just that you'll see areas that kind of take a break. Some of the names that outperformed last week underperformed a little bit today. Like, look at what the home builders did today. Right, that group was down 3.2%. Solar and clean energy, which have been strong, they were down. If you look at the outperformers today, blockchain crypto stocks were amongst today's leaders. Right, we know that the some of the cryptos have been kind of taking a little bit of, speaking of a breather, have also been taking a breather there. And I think that right now we're just seeing those opportunities to come in. So we've got some data that's going to come out tomorrow, PPI report, and then on Thursday you're going to get the CPI report. I will not be doing end of day recaps probably for the rest of this week. I might be able to squeeze a short one in tomorrow, but if not, that's kind of my schedule for the rest of this week. But I think overall, instead of kind of continuing to, what I see from time to time is people are constantly thinking of things that could go wrong that are going to bring the market down. I continue to say trade the market in front of you. That's not a great way I've talked a little bit about that in the weekend video too, that it's just not a great way to be. Now, like, there's a big difference between understanding like what the week's events are and understanding where you might get a little bit of volatility. But I see too many people, in my opinion, that are going out there and saying, "Oh, what's going to get this market to sell off? What's going to get this market to sell off?" Because I think if you kind of stay with it, you are seeing groups that are selling off, and but again, they become opportunities, right? And I think that's what's been very cool, and very, for lack of a better word, interesting about this market is that sell offs into support are getting bought. And so I hope that this continues. I hope that we continue to see what we're seeing, where, hey, the semis get knocked down one day, right, and they kind of come into support, and then they get bought again, right? And it's one of those things too. And I think that's also, by the way, why you're not seeing this market get super overheated, is because every few days you're seeing profit taking in one of these groups. So in any event, I'll go over the rest of the performance for the day. SPY just up 0.2 of a percentage point. Qs were up about the same. IWM for the second day underperformed. Again, remember what has been the recent outperformer? It's been the small caps. They're just taking a little bit of a breather, it seems, right now. And I'll go over that chart in just a second. Gold was down a little bit. Let those gold miners, which have been red hot, cool down a little bit. They couldn't even stay down that much today. The gold mine GDX was down 0.6%. Silver miners were down a little bit more, down 1.1%, but that's not a lot considering the move that some of these names out of the moves that have been having in that space. Let me just bring up let's go back to the charts here for a second. And I'm going to bring up the SPY chart. All right, so let's talk about where we are here for just a second. There we go. There's our SPY chart. We're right back. We did make it through. Nice end of day like buy program. There was a big MOC today, and this did break through that value area for the week. Right now, you're looking at two value areas here. So if I turn this one off, you'll see what I'm talking about. But we're testing those highs from last week, right? And this is another thing too. Go back to what we saw last week after the jobs data. Right, very a little bit too hot going into the jobs data. A great opportunity to take some profits, and then we sell off a little bit, but we just kind of come back down into into the range of where we've been. So again, it's one of those markets where you want to be greedy in some things, and I totally get that. But for the overall market in some things, it's good to have that dry powder to be able to scoop up and buy some of these dips. And I went over that in yesterday's video with Open Door and about how that rips, especially like looking at what the MarketWebs volume at price indicator is telling you, right? Is that, hey, it's ripping right into overhead supply. It hits overhead supply, it sells off, then it regroups, just like we're seeing with the overall market. So again, obviously, that stock isn't the whole market, but it's very symbolic of what we're dealing with right now. The Qs did breach to the value area for the week. So again, that was the big hang up that I was seeing this week, is just that we were kind of coming into some short-term resistance and having a difficult time with it. Now, could we get back into the range tomorrow if the PPI report is hot? We could. But again, I would watch to see when you see these mini sell-offs like this, watch this, the best thing to do is, try not to freak out. And I know, like, I saw people on social media freaking out a little bit about, they are fast moves, but when the dust settles, we seem to just be kind of coming back into some support. So I think that's something, if that report does come in hotter than expected and there's a knee-jerk reaction, watch to see what, and this is where having the MarketWebs indicator helps a lot, because if we're just selling off into support, and you could see this, by the way, last week, right? When this big move happened on Friday, we just checked right back to the top of the value area for the week. So that's what I would be watching. Again, I always, even though I just said a couple minutes ago that, you know, not to dwell on events and what you think is going to bring the market down, but understand that you do have an event tomorrow, and if it comes in, the numbers are not great for whatever reason, watch your support levels, right? So that's the Qs, and I'm also going to just bring up the daily chart here for the Qs. Yeah, I mean, we're right back into this top of value, right? And again, there's nothing wrong with this, right? There's nothing wrong with right now, doing a little bit of digestion in here, even though once again we finished, we finished positive for the day. Here's this, big sell-off in IWM. Again, I'm being a little bit sarcastic, but we're just kind of checking back to the 5-day moving average, right? A little bit extended, right? Strong performance last week, and we're just kind of checking back to the 5-day moving average. No change in trend. All right, let's get to some individual movers. Well, we already went over Oracle. The big move today, and again, this is what's making this market also just very interesting, is like these announcements that are made where there's a contract, right? We're seeing this across sectors, right? We've seen this with, like, the rare earth companies, with various different segments of the market. But NBIS up huge. This came out, I think, right after I did the video yesterday, but it's a 50%. It's a 50% move. We did see, decent option activity. I talked about that in the trading room last week. I actually took a small position in those weekly calls that expire this week. It's pretty crazy. I was talking, just to kind of go over what I was talking about after the close yesterday, and I said those calls, you have to be careful about, how you're positioning in calls. Now, obviously, this worked out really well, but a lot of times calls expire worthless, right? And I put on. September 12th calls today. I'm sorry, last week, and they went all the way down. Right, these were the 68 calls that I saw that hit the tape. Like there was about $1 million in premium that someone sizable call position and but the calls went all the way down from where I bought them. I think I bought them around like $1.50 or something like that. They were marking at 65 cents. Right. So I the point is I think the majority of what I trade nowadays is stock, right? Because I don't have to get two things right when I trade stock. Right? I only have to get the direction right. With options, what makes option trading very difficult, and people don't talk about this enough, is that you have to get two things right. You got to get the direction right, and you got to get the timing right. And a lot of times, if you don't get the timing right, the the um, the calls expire worthless. So in this sense, I had bought something like for around like $1.50. It was trading all the way down to 65 cents. Now, am I going to stop myself out of that trade? No. What my methodology when I do trade calls for speculation is understand once you click the mouse, like that is the premium, like that is, and you buy those calls, right? The premium is your stop loss, right? Because a lot of times I used to trade a lot more options years ago, and I noticed that what people do is they stop themselves out of an option trade, right? And then after they stop themselves out of an option trade, then something crazy happened that they thought was going to happen, that they why they originally bought the calls, and you're cutting your nose off to spite your face. So the way that I do it is I let the premium be my stop, zero. Right. And this way I properly size the trade. When I understand, okay, I'm buying this many calls, right? And this is the dollar amount the of the premium, that's the most I can lose, right? And if that's too large of a quantity, or if that's too much, then you bring down the size, right? And in any event, I'd like to see. Um, it's nice when you have a winner like that, but you also always want to think about too, whenever you're putting on either an option trade or a regular trade, what you're you know what you're what's the biggest loss that you're going to have in a trade. So I don't use stop prices when I trade options and short-term options like that. And then always when I have a trade on, or when I'm getting into a trade, I know where my out is going to be. I'd always have your stop price in mind, so that ahead of before you pull the trigger, before you click the mouse, pull the trigger, you know exactly where you're going to get out of a trade. But anyway, I just there's always different things to learn, even when you have a nice winner like this, and I had a nice winner with this. It's important to understand how these options work, and why I was letting an option that I bought for $1.50, $1.60 go all the way down to 65 cents. And they would have expired if nothing would have happened by Friday. I would have had, a loss in that trade. But that is the process of the thought process of going into calls, or going into a short-term option trade. So generally, I don't play options for big size, because once again, going back to what I originally said, it's very difficult to constantly get two things right: the timing and the direction. All right, let's carry on. I was really surprised at the pin action that you saw in the NBIS. Look at IREN. And by the way, this is another example of a very strong name. It just consolidates for a few days into the earnings gap, and look at it go up 15%. I did not have anything on in this one. I didn't trade it, but it was very, very impressive. CoreWeave also had a big day. This stock is still kind of still below its 50-day moving average. So more than likely, I would have sold into that strength. Again, didn't have anything on in that. Going back to what you're seeing with these names, and what was strong today were the uranium and power generation names. I went long. This was a name. This was a name that I talked about. This was one of my favorite setups going into this week. And I had put that on Substack both on Sunday and on Monday. I mentioned it again with the 1 hour chart too, and put a level where I said to have an alert on this trade. But I just like the sideways price action at the 50-day moving average, right? And resolving higher. OKLO is another name that I know is very popular on social media. This name is also kind of looking interesting here. Notice how these are honoring the 50-day moving average. Break down to the 50-day moving average, bounce. Break down to the 50-day moving average, bounce. Right. So, and again, if I were to get in this name, whether it's today or couple days prior, that's exactly what I would use. Probably also use the bottom of the value area here. Also VST, which is a name that we've seen some call activity in. I'm not in this name any longer. I was back in here, took a profit target, but a little bit too erratic for me. But if it gets back above the 50-day moving average, not bad. I actually saw some call activity at the end of the day in NRG. This is a name that I haven't traded in a while. I traded it more when it was moving like this. I actually had this in the TTG trend portfolio, but I don't have it in there anymore, considering it just kind of went too sideways for me. But I would continue to watch some of these names in that power space, because when they do kind of come into support, they seem to get bought. So LEU was a good trade for me today. Also, another name that I see folks talking about is Palantir. Palantir is now, after spending, I think, like 13 days around, speak of 50-day moving averages, around 13 days around that 50-day moving average, and it's trying to resolve higher. Now, needs to push a little bit more. It needs to get through this 20-day moving average, but this is a good start. And again, you could simply just go put your stop maybe a little bit lower than the 50-day moving average. You may have gotten stopped out here. That's okay. You can reassess, right? And you can go back into the name. Sometimes I do that quite a bit with trades. The quantum names got going today. A couple of them. Speaking of a name that's honoring its 50-day moving average, this RGTI, again, it's not a great spot when there's strength like this, right? It's a much better setup and a much better name when it checks back into the 50-day moving average. Look at how many times this thing has done this. And here, that was when the stock was around 8, runs up to 13, 14. That's a real nice gain for a short-term trade. Comes back in 50-day moving average, spend some time there. Even if you didn't get involved in the perfect day, it's still giving you a nice bounce, right? And it looks like it's starting to do it again. So really nice, very methodical for now. I think that some of the other names look okay, but I kind of like that one the best. This QUBT is starting to come around too. I think INOQ took out a VPOC here. And then also, if you don't want to trade some of these names that aren't making any major revenue yet, IBM had nice follow through. And we discussed IBM in yesterday's video, but really nice move from the 200 to the 50-day moving average. And that's a trade in itself right there. Let's see, a couple other names I wanted to go over. I got long at the end of the day some AEHR yesterday. Still kind of putting together this bull flag, but ultimately looking for a move up to 28.40 here. JD is a name that I went over yesterday. Speaking of calls, I went long some calls in this. Very nice move today, and was able to take this off for some nice. I still have the trade on, but I think it made like about 40% on the calls that I put on. Remember, I went to the 37.5 calls rather than the 40. The financials got going a little bit today. I covered them in yesterday's video too. Look at the nice move here in Morgan Stanley, right? And again, nice move into the 20-day moving average here, and it bounces like other things. Another name that I got a trigger at the end of the day, don't have anything on, but I'll be watching tomorrow, is Dave, right? This is a fintech company. Also, speaking of fintech, firm actually looks pretty good here too. Watch for tomorrow. The level that I'll be watching in a firm is basically right where it is. 88.30 is what I'll be watching. All right, so I've talked about how I like this market, the way that this market has been going, where you're getting these rips and then you're getting pullbacks and shallow pullbacks into support. So I hope that it continues that way. I'm not trying to jinx anything, but like I said, for as long as this wants to continue like this, where we're getting the movement out of some areas and into others, it helps. I think, in my opinion, to have some other names and other groups besides just the popular ones, right, to get involved in, because they're getting involved as well. So I think that there continues to be trading opportunities, and we'll see how it goes with this week's inflation data. Guys, have a great night. See you tomorrow.